Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues. I'm very sorry for a short technical delay. Let me introduce myself. My name is Valery Isak. I'm Deputy Director of the International Law and Cooperation for the Ministry of Justice of Russia. Let me welcome you to the 5th Jubilee International St. Petersburg Legal Forum, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our colleagues from Thailand, which will speak on the presentation on Thai law. First is Vongthep Arthakaivalvatee and Vitaya Suriyawong. So it gives me pleasure to give them the floor, and I think it's going to be extremely interesting to get to learn the Thai law, the law of the Kingdom of Thailand. It will be interesting to get to know what kind of humanitarian issues exist, because politically and economically we're getting closer and closer to Thailand, and that's why it will be extremely interesting for us to listen to the two distinguished presenters. So please, the floor is yours.
Mr. Deputy Director, for a warm welcome. Good morning, everyone. I am very pleased to be part of the Thai delegation to participate in the 5th International Legal Forum here in St. Petersburg. And of course, you know, we are very happy to be in such a beautiful city of St. Petersburg. It is our first time. And again, I would like to emphasize our appreciation to the Ministry of Justice of the Russian Federation to invite us. We are, I think that the reason why we are very much interested to be participating in this forum is that it aims to encourage us to think about the importance of legal reform. And I think that this year's theme of the mission of law in an era of change is a very timely and appropriate one. Timely because we need to look at the necessity for legal reform or law reform against the backdrop of the changing international environments. And so this is what I would like to emphasize, that we are living in a very interesting and exciting time. I'm referring particularly to the one particular international environment development to do with within the framework of United Nations, and that is the ongoing discussion on the post-2015 United Nations Development Agenda, which will, after it is endorsed this year by the Summit of the Leaders in New York, it will become the new Agenda Development that replaces the old Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs. I'm saying this to emphasize the importance of the linkage between the question of the rule of law and development, which needs to be recognized as a very close link. Because if you recall, when we talk about the global development under the framework of the Millennium Development Goals, we in fact never had the goals or targets and indicators that talks about the question of justice and the rule of law. It is the first time that in the idea of, with the international community generating idea of developing new agenda after the 15 years, how to renew political commitments at the international level. For the first time, it starts to recognize that there can be no development without a proper and strong rule of law and the criminal justice institution system in place. And that is, I would venture to say, a minimum requirements for a strong basis for justice, security, and development. Having said that, then I think that the point here that we are here at the Legal Forum in St. Petersburg, the discussion on the need to develop law should not be seen as an isolated exercise. It needs to be looked at in the framework of how we can stack up against the global environment. Okay. So with that, I would like to draw your attention that just last month before we came to Russia, we had the pleasure of participating in a very important United Nations conference. In fact, it is called United Nations Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. And it was at that meeting in Doha where they adopted what we call the Doha Declaration, emphasizing the need to have a fair, efficient, transparent, effective criminal justice system as a strong foundation of the rule of law and development. So you see, we looking at this and we say that, yes, maybe this is time for us to be thinking about our action at the domestic level as well. What can we do, in the country of Thailand in terms of developing or revising or updating the law, so as to, to correspond to these developments. So I mentioned about that meeting, the United Nations meeting in Doha, because that was also for the first time that the UN Congress on criminal justice issue spoke about the necessity of the integrated approach to criminal justice policy. Okay, I emphasize this point because it's very important, because oftentimes, despite of, for all good intents and purposes, we develop the law and policy with the idea of achieving a certain objective. For example, if we're talking about corrections, how we treat our prisoners, we're looking at how we improve the prison system. But it needs to be recognized that the treatment of offenders is a multifaceted exercise that covers many different other aspects to do with rehabilitation of offenders. In the case of women prisoners, we are talking about gender-sensitive treatment. So there are several other considerations that need to be taken place. The point of the matter is, if the direction of the international community is moving towards integrated approach, then if we could be inspired to take a domestic action towards legal reform, we need to also be thinking along the line of the integrated approach as well. So on that basis, we then would like to take the opportunity to coming to the beautiful city of St. Petersburg and to share with you some thoughts regarding the impact of drug policy and law in the Thai criminal justice system. So as to show you that, yes, we recognize that there is a need to enhance the law, but that we do so in accordance with the international standards. I would like to say that with the current government of Thailand, when it comes to the justice policy, there are 5 sub-areas in which the government attach importance to. First, of course, fighting corruption, promoting community-based rehabilitation, fighting transnational organized crime, particularly human trafficking, promoting social disparity and access to justice. So you see, these ideas, these are the main policy initiatives. When it comes to the question of anti-narcotic law, it's often recognized that there is a close linkage between drug offenders and those who are incarcerated in prisons. So that particular aspect is very important. Now, in the past, we're talking about the possession of drugs, the drugs issue. The tendency would be that the law would aim to punish the offenders, those who are producers and traffickers, and including consumers. There have been a gradual shift towards treatment and rehabilitation for drug addicts over the years, but the view is that drug sale and use is a crime that should be punished. That view is still very strong and valid to this day. So that policy was also intensified some years ago during the government war on drugs. Okay. Now there are there are a set of laws to do with the question of anti-narcotic drugs, but the one that are relevant, there are several of them, but the two that are relevant was the Narcotics Act of 1979 and Narcotics Addict Rehabilitation Act of 2002. I would like to emphasize also on the Narcotics Act of 1979 that it sets the different levels and types of criminalized drugs offense, as well as the sentence for each type of crime. For example, this is categorized broadly into 5 levels, with type 1 being the most serious types of illicit crimes, illicit drug. It is important that we take a look at the punishment for the sale and production and the use and possession of drugs, that you will see that at all of them, imprisonment was the main measure. And the problem of the drug trafficking in Thailand intensified in the mid-90s. Let's say in 1996, there was a pandemic of the methamphetamine types of drugs. And so previously, the offense for methamphetamine type drugs was category 4. Now was moved to category 1, which is a serious offense. So when we talk about the narcotic law of 2002, one of the main features was that because we recognize that other than the offenders, there are a number of people who are drug addicts, and they should be treated rather than punished. And so that was the main paradigm shift in the 2002 Narcotic Drugs Rehabilitation Act, was to emphasize on treating drug users as drug addicts and to provide necessary treatment for them. So that the diversion scheme in the Act allowed for prisoners for drug-related offenses to be taken out of criminal justice system and be treated in the rehabilitation centers. However, because of a later criminal justice policy and lack of resources, this has not been implemented in its fullest potential. I emphasize this because, yes, we continue to treat drug addicts as addicts and not traffickers. What I'm trying to say is that more needs to be done, and we need to develop more, in order to move in that direction. Then the situation that I would like to emphasize is, but because of that rise in drug trafficking and use, especially in the methamphetamine type of drugs, we see the corresponding scheme related to the number of offenders going to prison, the Thai prison, and you can see that now in the past many years, the Thai prison population has been on the rise. Latest, as of May of this year, there are a total of 300,000 plus people in prison. 69% of them, you can say 70% of them, are being imprisoned for drug-related offense. So the question is, how do we tackle the question of reducing prison overcrowding, reducing the number of people going to prison, using more alternative measures to imprisonment? All of these discussions need to be looked at against the backdrop of how do we tackle the linkage for drug-related offenders in going to the criminal justice system. So, as I was alluding to, the importance of the international level when we're talking about the development of criminal justice policy, the importance of integrated approach. So the Ministry of Justice of Thailand undertook to to integrate its work. We have a number of responsible agencies. For example, the Office of Narcotics Control Board is our drug fighting agency. But within the Ministry of Justice, on the side of the MOJ, we have several other agencies that dealing with related issues for mainly Department of Corrections. We have here Mr. Vitaya, Suriyawong, my colleague, who is Director General of Department of Corrections. He will be speaking more on this, the corrections issue. But you see, there are other issues, Department of Juvenile Observation, Department of Probation. That's, these are very important elements in order to tackle drug-related issues, particularly a category of offenders. Okay, so because of the, for example, if I talk about the Department of Probation, it's also working on its own legislation as well. But today, as I mentioned to you, I think that our focus now, because the Ministry of Justice, having in mind the importance of enhancing integrated approach, would like to reform three main legislations relating to this particular problem, the linkage between drugs and imprisonment. The number one of the major important issues is the new corrections bill, which Mr. Vitaya will be talking about. The other two are still in the pipeline, but we are coming up with them. Would be the more enhanced version of the anti-narcotics law and the new probation bill. So I would like to transfer now to my dear colleague, Mr. Vitaya Suriyawong, the Director General of Department of Corrections, just to focus more as to how Thailand is coming up with the idea of legal reform against the backdrop of the importance of promoting integrated approach as per the movement of the international environment. So I would stop here, Mr. Deputy Director. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Without further ado, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for your interest in the Thai legal context and how we initiate reform. As my colleague has mentioned to you, that we have been suffering with the obstacle of law or obsolete or inefficient law, especially on the narcotics. It has created a great result onto the prison population, and the Thai prison system is the victim of this law. And we can't do much because we are at the end of the pipeline. So we may receive a higher number of inmates and creates a lot of problem in terms of prison management. What I would like to share our experience today is how we initiate law reform, especially the Thai Prison Act. And we could say that Thai Prison Act is one of the masterpieces of the Ministry of Justice for the present day. And as we all agree in this forum that changing the law, we must be constantly reviewing. Otherwise, it would be able to cope up with the changing in society. But for Thailand, changing the law is one of the most difficult, and it is unthinkable for us to do so because there will be a long period, and there are two levels of the National Legislative Assembly. One is the House of Representatives, and the other one is the House of the Senate. In a normal time, we won't be able to achieve these. But with the present government, and we were given a green light to initiate some change in terms of Prison Act. And once we receive a mandate, we look into the existing law. The Thai prison law has been in place for nearly 80 years. It was enacted in 1936, which is very long time ago. I believe that all of us here haven't born yet. Otherwise, you won't be able to sit in this room. It's 80 years old. But the law is still functioning, but there are so many issues that need to be addressed. During the past 80 years, the law has been reviewed, but only a small pieces to solve certain issues. But it is a time for Thailand this time to have the whole law change. And then how do we initiate the change? First, we have to conceptualize, and then we have to find like-minded people. We call it snowballing. We have to gain more people who would like to change and who love to see the change, especially the media and the public. And we start doing many things. In order to explain to you further, I have brought along a short film, lasts about 7 minutes, explaining how we conceptualize the law and how we start to change. And without further ado, I would like to ask my colleagues, Dee, can you start the short film? Yes, it is about how we conceptualize the Thai Prison Act and how could we justify the need to change. Please go ahead. And I think there's some problem of the microphone, but with the technician as a troubleshooter, they try to insert the voice into your earphone.
Social and cultural change. The shifts in both system and structure have driven all organizations and all forms of life to constantly adapt to continued survival. Amidst these dynamics, Thai society has had to face difficulties and disparity, leading to complicated problems that make it seem as though there are no roads ahead, only darkness and dead ends. After court judgments, the Department of Corrections is viewed as the end point, receiving problems that have accumulated and become more serious over the years. Curators are unable to address these challenges, whether they are the number of prisoners, which already overflow the prisons and are still increasing, the insufficient number of staff, who are overburdened with the large amount of work, the never-ending problems that occur in prisons, whether it be drugs or the smuggling of mobile phones, the treatment of prisoners, which is still not in line with developing international standards. Are we going to see and let these problems continue, or is it time for change? The current mechanism driving the work of the Thai Department of Corrections is the 1936 Corrections Act. It has been amended many times, but no substantial improvements have been made. It remains outdated, behind the current times, incomprehensive in terms of both the prison management system and resource management system, inconsistent with modern correctional philosophies and policies, as well as international standards, especially the standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, or S.M.A.R.T. These are the reasons behind the drafting of a new Corrections Act, an act that will bring structural change and elevate Thai corrections in all dimensions, including philosophy of corrections, by emphasizing treatment and rehabilitation to return good citizens to society, rather than merely punishment, revenge, and retribution as in the past. Organizations education and personnel management by establishing a correctional policy committee to determine policy and set a clear direction for corrections work, as well as creating systems to recruit and build the capacity of personnel. Standards and Prison Management System (PMS) by developing standards for every aspect of corrections practice, including classification and allocation, registration, treatment, designing new prisons to systematically manage prisoners, decrease overcrowding, and facilitate corrections work in accordance with international standards, as well as establishing measures to relieve prisons of prisoners, such as intermittent imprisonment and using new technology to efficiently keep prisoners in custody. Resource, image, and opportunity management by developing and making the best use of existing resources to open avenues of cooperation with the private sector in areas such as medical care, vocational training, and employment to support the productivity of prisoners, as well as giving the Corrections Act flexibility to allow adaptation to society and international standards that may be changed in the future. The new Corrections Act is therefore an important tool that will change the Thai Department of Corrections from a receptacle for problems to a source of value, inspiration, and creation of human capital to transform Thai corrections with SMART, standards in line with international principles in all parts of the system, management, efficient management and utilization of current limited resources to their maximum capabilities. A. Active, ready for any challenge we might face in the future. R. Reduce cost, reduction of unnecessary costs. T. Transparency, more transparency and fairness in ensuring prisoner rights and administering punishments. To increase capability, enhance correctional capacity, and protect society with efficiency. For 100 years, the Department of Corrections has upheld its duty to the citizens of Thailand. For 78 years, the 1936 Correction Act has remained in force. It is now time for the face of Thai corrections to change and step forward into a new age of public safety.
Understand the concept idea of how we okay, due to some technical problem and the movie will not be able to spell out what we think how to change, but it's explain the idea how we improve, and the law could be one of the tools to reform Thai corrections. We make the film in order to explain decision makers to understand the whole concept of how we want to change and why do we need to change. To conceptualize the idea is the most difficult part. We have to collect and do stock taking, and before we frame up with a draft law. And if we table the whole text of law onto the table of the cabinet, they won't be able to understand the whole idea. They will fall into a pitfall of the, we call quicksand, and they won't go any further. Then we decided to make a short film in order to explain the whole idea and where will we go with this law and what would be the implication of the Thai New Correction Act would have an effect on the treatment of offenders. To explain further, I prepare a PowerPoint presentation in order to explain to you further. If you still remember, we still have the function called SMART. SMART means S-M-A-R-T, corrections mean the first one that we have to adhere to and look up to is standard. International standard is the most important because our law has been used for 80 years. The 80-year standard and nowadays standard is totally different. So we have to do stock taking. The second one is management. We hope that the law would help us to solve all the management issues these days. And for example, the prisoner allocation, transfer, the prison management system, that the law is an obstacle, so it should be eliminated. The second one is active. Active means the law should be able, for correction department, to be able to respond quickly to any issues that arise. And the R is the reduce costs. Reduce cost is the most important issues that the government assigned us to look into because we are facing an overcrowding. Right now we have 332,000 prisoners, which is one of the highest prison population in Asia. And with this number, there are about more than 70% they are drug-related prisoners. This drug-related prisoner is a result of a policy. A policy is that my colleague has mentioned to you. We call Get Tough on Drug policy that had resulted in a huge number of prison population. How would the law be able to reduce costs? That is our own issue. But to stop people from sending more prisoners is not our issue, it's his issue. So he will deal with the issue of keeping fewer and fewer prison population, that's his issue. But for us, how we reduce the cost of keeping such a high number. And the fifth one is transparency. Transparency, as you know, keeping people behind bar, there are a lot of issues that people and the public want to see. And how could we ensure that the prison management is transparent and open to an oversight or outsider oversight? This is the most important. So the law will be enable us to complete with the whole idea, smart correction in the future. And the second one that we have to keep in mind is the United Nations has one of the most important instruments on the treatment of offender. It's called United Nations Standard Minimum Rule for the Treatment of Prisoners. It has been used since 1955 and now coming to year 60. In Thailand, when you are reaching 60 years old, you are supposed to retire. So the S.M.A.R.T of the UN should be retired as well. And luckily, last week at the United Nations Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice has adopted a new version of the S.M.A.R.T. And our law has to be on par or compatible to the new standard issued by the UN. The second one is manifest, how the law ensure an openness of the prison system and how could we change. So all these key ideas of the new United Nations Standard Minimum Rule for the Treatment of Prisoners must be compatible with our law. And we have done that because Mr. Vongthep is the rapporteur of the Bureau in drafting committee, and he and I keep talking to each other when we draft the law. So I was able to make sure that our law on par with his law. And the Thai New Corrections Act, because this session is an experience sharing, I would like to share how we could come up with the idea The first one, as we know, we still stick to the S.M.A.R.T, S.M.A.R.T. We have to stop taking a problem. We have done that for some time. What is the main issues that concern in the term of prison management? And then what is the issues that the law should be changed in order to solve that obstacle? When we found that, and then we visualize the solution, on which direction should we go? And then we frame up with the whole idea. The correction law is very unique because it explains the treatment of people 24 hours. Unlike any other law, you spell out and you enforce for people who live at home on certain issues. But the Thai Correction Act, the correction law, it's the law stipulating the treatment of certain group of people 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and many, many years. So how could this unique law efficient and create more fair and human treatment? Once we did that, we could able to come up with the new correction bills include status and organization of prisons. This law will be able to enable us to manipulate, to operate a better prison system. The second one is, this is the most important, the law spell out the principle or the philosophy of the treatment of prisoners. 80 years ago, the existing law just explained or tell us how to deal with people, but without direction. But this new law, it emphasizes on rehabilitation. Our day-to-day operation should aim to bring back a good citizen. That is the most important one. The next one is the prisoner rights. In the past 80 years, according to the existing law, it never mentioned about the right of the person behind bar. There is only one right spelled out in the existing law. It's the right to receive a certificate of release. And the rest, the law would say it is a duty of official to provide meal. It is a duty of official to provide clothing, bath, treatment. The law instructed the prison authority. It doesn't say that prisoner had the right to food. It doesn't say that prisoner had the right to medical service. But with new law, we changed the system. So it recognizes more rights of the people who are living behind bar. And it also mentioned about alternative to imprisonment. The old prison law 80 years ago never think about treatment of prisoners in the community, never think about privatization of prisons. But with this new law, it enables us to look into better way of treatment, of more alternative, more option for the treatment of prisoners. The last part, when we sell the idea to the government and the public won't care what would the life of prisoner behind bar be. What is the good one? But they will care about what will they gain if we have a new law. We have to list the issues that the government would gain from having this new law. The first one is the Thai society would have a safe society because the wrongdoer, the criminal, are efficiently kept in custody. The second one, the prisoners or the wrongdoer receive rehabilitation, a proper rehabilitation, to ensure that a smooth reintegration is available to them. The third one is we would help a better career for prison officials who work in the correction department They will have better career, better safe place for them. For the Thai Department of Correction, I mean for ourselves, what would we gain when having a new law? We have efficient prison management system. We have a good standard. We have a clear operating procedures. We have good image. As you know, prison everywhere always carry a bad reputation. Very few people who have been released from prison would say, oh, I have been released from heaven. 99.99% they would say, I have just released from a hell. That's in every country. But how could we change this public image onto the correction? For the government, what would the government receive from having a new law? They will have a safe society. They will have a better image for the government agency and enable Thailand for a competitiveness. Because prison is not a single issue for treatment people behind bars. It is related to country competitiveness, the trust in the criminal justice system. If Thai prison system is bad, how would the tourists would come to Thailand? Once they are arrested, they will be treated in a bad situation. So this will help the country for Thailand, for good image and competitiveness. And I'm happy to say that with this movie, with all this conceptualization, we were able to manage an approval from the cabinet in one reading. And the law is now in the Council of State. We call it a government body who help the government to look into a pattern of the law, not the principle. The principle is already approved. And then once the Council of State approve, go through the law, that they will give a green light back to the cabinet and go to the National Assembly. Fortunately, for the time being, we have only one house. We call it the National Legislative Assembly. And we don't have two houses like in the past. So I'm sure that within this year, and Thailand and Correction Department will enter into a new era of the treatment of prisoners. We are still preparing, we call a bylaw, we call it, or in Thailand we call ministerial regulations. A detailed law that explain further of the act. And also we prepare, we call SOP, Standard Operating Procedures. It will be a Bible for the treatment of prisoners in Thailand. So these three projects are still in the pipeline. Once the law has been approved or endorsed by the parliament, we will be able to move on to step 2 and step 3. And I thank you very much for your kind attention, and I would be happy to take on any questions that you would like me to explain further. Thank you very much.
Спасибо, господин Витая. Спасибо за то, что столь короткое.
Thank you very much for being able in such a very short time for your presentation. You delivered all the information so thoroughly about the way the correction system functions in the Kingdom of Thailand. The questions that you've raised are very close to us. And corruption combating, narcotic trafficking combating, transnational organized crime combating are also of crucial importance for us. The Russian Federation pays a lot of attention to these issues, and you've been exactly right, telling that these are the issues that are not just raised in the media, and these are the questions that are not just raised by the NGO, but actually these are the things that our society asks from us. Because the overall situation of today asks us to be active and proactive in this regard. My question, to our mind, 22 citizens of Russian Federation are being imprisoned in Thailand and are serving their time in jail in accordance with information from the Consular Services of Russia this year. Unfortunately, we don't have a two-way agreement of transferring inmates. The Kingdom of Thailand is not a participant of two multilateral conventions on this problem. But we know about some cases of very close cooperation and productive cooperation between the prosecutors' offices of Russian Federation and Thailand, and extradition of inmates have been made, especially, and some of them were charged with narcotics trafficking. But are you, well, even without the international agreement with the Russian Federation, can you really review the opportunity of transferring convicted Russian citizens who are serving their time in jail in correction systems of Thailand to Russia?
We welcome any approach for negotiating for a bilateral treaty. At the moment, we have nearly 40 countries that have been on agreement or signing the contract, not a contract, we call a treaty of transferring a convicted inmate. Unfortunately, on the bilateral basis, we cannot do that. But please, we make sure. I would welcome any initiative by Russian government to Thailand through a diplomatic channel to negotiate the transfer treaty. And we have already have a set of we call a model treaty. You can look into at hand at any principle that this is not a new issue. We have done that with many countries. And it won't take long. And you are more than welcome to have a treaty with us. And for the S.M.A.R.T, multilateral agreement, we have that with the Office of the Attorney General, and also for the extradition treaties, that is in charge by Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Office of the Attorney General. And we would welcome any good cooperation, no problem at all.
Спасибо.
Thank you. Any questions, please?
Микрофон.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'm the head of the Minister of Justice Department in Kamchatka, Russia. Do you have a norm in Thai law about probation and pre-term release, especially for the people convicted for narcotics, and those 300,000 people that are inmates? Can you do you have any examples when they have been when they found jobs, and do they have any support in getting the jobs after they've been released? Thank you. Что касается условно-досрочного, у нас есть два типа условно-досрочного. Первое — до вынесения приговора. Это те, кто совершает правонарушения, при этом вынесен приговор не более 2 лет заключения. Суд, получив прокурорский отчет, мы можем на основании его вынести решение о условно-досрочном освобождении. Суд может вынести постановление об условно-досрочном освобождении на 2 года. Да, вместо того, чтобы непосредственно отправлять человека в тюрьму. И второй тип УДО — это действительно на поруки. Да, вы понимаете, да? То есть мы отправляем на поруки, то есть после того, как уже какое-то количество времени человек отсидел, мы выпускаем его на условно-досрочное освобождение, то есть человек выходит за пределы пенитенциарной системы. И период... Переключите, пожалуйста, канал на первый.
Once they serve half of the sentence, the remaining period will be on parole. But not everybody receive a parole. There is a committee to consider the case by case based on good behavior and the likelihood of being a good citizen. That two issues will be taken into consideration. And as for the, we call reintegration tools that help release inmates to find a job and to prevent recidivism. And fortunately, we just received an instruction from the Prime Minister that the Ministry of Justice should take a lead in trying to establish a sustainable tools or structure to make sure that those released inmates, we have a smooth reintegration. I mean, we will have better one, better system. But right now, we just handed them to Ministry of Labor if they need a job, Ministry of Social Development and Human Security if they need any other assistance. But these two ministries, they are also look after general population. So when released inmate or ex-convicted asking for help from them, they receive low priority. So realizing the issues of the priority among the needy, the Thai government instructed Ministry of Justice to take a lead and to improve the system. I'm sure that if we have a next forum, if we are able to meet each other again, I will be able to report to you again. Thank you.
Спасибо большое за ответ.
Thank you very much for this answer. Colleagues, any other questions, please? No more questions. There seems to be. Then allow me to thank our guests in here, Mr. Vongthep and Mr. Vitaya. I'd like to wish you all the successful work, and hopefully your participation in all the venues and all the events of this forum will be successful and fruitful. Allow me to wish you success in promoting this law further on in the Parliament of the Kingdom of Thailand. And all the best, and see you again, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much.